We're going to be hearing from Tarek Azzam. He's the director of the EvalUators Institute and associate professor at the Division of Behavioral and Organizational Sciences at the Claremont Graduate University, where his research focuses on developing new methods for real-world evaluation. Again, I encourage you to use the hashtag EvalYouth 2017 on Twitter and to post your questions and comments on the chat box. I'm giving the floor to you, Tarek. Welcome.
Great, thank you. And I want to just thank the organizers and the presenters for inviting me to participate in this wonderful session. I've heard amazing things about last year's session, and I look forward and I'm excited to join this year's session. I apologize for the darkness. It's actually approximately 5 a.m. or so my time. But I'm sure that's the case for a good number of you. So thank you for showing your commitment on a Saturday to participate in this. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is I know that the general topic of this session is developing individual evaluator capabilities, and one of the interesting facets of this is there are just a tremendous amount of advances in a lot of different methodological arenas and domains that I believe have a direct impact on evaluation and our ability to do evaluation. A common example is the use of Twitter by the UN to track the spread of certain diseases across different regions, of course, we've heard of Facebook and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I'm interested in is seeing how we could potentially leverage some of these new capabilities for evaluation practice, and that's going to be the focus of my session. So I've been doing a lot of research in the area of crowdsourcing, specifically in evaluation, and within that. I want to, for those that aren't familiar with what crowdsourcing is, I'd like to just provide a brief definition of what that is. So crowdsourcing is the paid recruitment of an independent global workforce for the objective of working on a specifically defined task or set of tasks. And so in essence, it's the ability to access hundreds, if not thousands of people and ask them to do something that's that can potentially help you in the conduct of evaluation. And so historically speaking, crowdsourcing has been used for things such as tagging pictures. They've actually done an effective job in translating text, where there's been research showing that if the translation task is set up in an effective way, that they will produce as good results as a professional translator. Reviewing website content, search and rescue. There's a classic example where an individual's plane crashed in a very remote region, and the researchers were able to gather approximately 50,000 people to review satellite pictures in order to identify the location of the plane. And for a lot of our purposes, there's also the potential for using crowdsourcing to both validate instruments, test their reliability, ensure that they're actually representing what it is that you want them to represent. And I've used it also for data visualization, which is another area that I'm into. One of the things that I've done in the past is for example, I posted when I'm working on an evaluation report. Sometimes I'll actually utilize the crowd and post this information online and ask them which visualization is clear, what do you think it's saying, so that I make sure that what I think is being represented in the visualization is actually being interpreted in the way that I want them to. And so here's an example where they actually click on the visualization that they think is the best or the clearest, and it helps me to design and develop really effective data visualization tools and techniques on presentations. And so how do you access the crowd? There's actually quite a few websites that allow you to access the crowd, but one of the most utilized one is Amazon Mechanical Turk, or it's called MTurk for short. It's the largest, most well-known. There's been a lot of studies utilizing it. It has approximately 500,000 people from across the globe. The concentrations tend to be actually in Southeast Asia and in Northern America. However, there are a lot of individuals from across the globe that can potentially be accessed. And I believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be actually a larger representation of that. And so within crowdsourcing, within Amazon, within MTurk, the way you access the crowd is you develop what's called a human intelligence task, or a HIT. You provide a description of what is it that you want to do, the approximate payment associated with that task, and how long is it going to take to actually complete the task. And then this is what the website looks like, and then this is generally what the information that's being collected on there also looks like. And then the task is posted online, and depending on the parameters that you set, the link to the task, the amount of pay, individuals will begin to complete that task. So if you want, for example, to validate a survey or test out how well how well people actually understand it, you can post this, ask about 50 people to complete the task, and once 50 people have completed the task, then the advertisement or the hit is removed from the list of tasks that's available. There's also another website that most people may not know of that I think is related to this. It's something called Turk Prime. The nice thing about Turk Prime is actually it's purpose-built for researchers, and I would also say for evaluators. It allows you a lot more tools to utilize when trying to develop instruments and when you're trying to access various crowds. It's also, from an affordability standpoint, it's also more affordable, mainly because the way that Amazon does its payment structure, it basically, if you collect more than 10 respondents, it'll charge you a 40% commission rate. If it's below 10, then the commission rate is only 10%. So if you basically are spending, let's just say $100 US, Amazon will charge you an additional 40 to access the cloud if you collect more than 10. And what Turk Prime does is it does something called micro batching. And so it allows you to it automatically posts up to 10 respondents, and then once those 10 are completed, then it'll post another 10 and another 10 until you reach, let's just say, the 100 individuals that you want to access. And what that does is it keeps the Amazon commission from 40% to only 10%. So it's just as a helpful hint if you're interested in exploring this option. So I want to just step back and give you kind of an idea of what crowdsourcing is and kind of some of the potential uses for it, at least within evaluation practice. So there's a concept that's called wisdom of the crowd that's been around for a while, and it's the idea that actually if you're able to harness a lot of different individuals' perspectives to actually accomplish something, that they actually do a relatively good job of analysis, prediction, and a lot of different variables. But it has to be under certain conditions where that is optimized. And these conditions are that the crowd has to be diverse. If you are doing a crowdsourcing study and everyone has the same background, same experience, same age, it's not gonna necessarily produce the best results. Diversity is key. Each response must be independent of each other. So a person responding to an item must not know how another person responded. And the nice thing about the crowdsourcing platform is that it does allow for that, where no one knows how everyone else responds. So they're really providing that social bias component is not really as present. And each judgment must be based on local or individual knowledge, which means that you can't, for example, you can't ask the crowd to comment on the performance of a single individual because they don't necessarily have any information on who that individual is. So when you do ask them questions, you have to think about, can they for example, if you ask them opinions on certain issues that may be relevant to your evaluation, do they have the background to really talk about that? And then ultimately, it's the responses must be aggregated. There's an idea that the mean, the average, the central tendency of the crowd's responses really gives you the kind of the best answer. It's the idea that when you have a lot of varying opinions, there's actually they kind of the right answer is where that average is. Okay. So from a methodological standpoint, the implications of crowdsourcing have a lot to do with things, at least personally, I think, on quantitative methods, on qualitative methods, and also mixed methods, and also on evaluation methods. So quantitatively, the crowd can potentially be used as a source for a comparison group. And we've done a study, which I don't have time to go through, but it's part of the PowerPoint, if you'll receive it, that you can access, where we actually had a randomized control trial, and we also had a control group that was generated from the crowd. We were testing a particular outcome variable, which was improved intrinsic motivation, and we had a true treatment control condition, and then we had a true and then a comparison group that was derived from the crowd, and we actually were able to match the enter crowd, or the crowdsource crowd, to the treatment condition. And one of the questions we wanted to answer was, did the crowd produce the same outcome that the true randomized control trial did? And from our analysis, it actually did accomplish that. Now, I would not say that that's a definitive. I wouldn't say I'm very cautious about that result, and I believe that further studies are needed. But I just wanted to conduct what I would call a test of concept to see if this is actually something that is possible to potentially utilize as a potential tool. And the details of the study are presented. And again, for time's sake, I wanted to include it in there because I knew that the PowerPoints would be available, but I just wanted to provide that for your information. From another perspective, crowdsourcing is actually really has, I think, a lot of potential from a mixed method analysis perspective. So can it be used to actually look at and potentially quantify qualitative data? And we've done a series of studies that actually attempt to answer that question. The most basic study that we did was what I'll call a test of concept. We posted an interview transcript on a crowdsourcing platform, and we had the crowd complete two different tasks. One is they had to rate the overall student experience, so they had to say, was this experience good, bad, on a rating scale, and then they had to actually select text from the interviews that support that rating. So it's not that they just had an opinion and just put the rating on there, but they actually had to read the text and find supporting evidence for that. And we did actually 5 rounds of this with different samples, because what I wanted to test out was, is it reliable? Is it consistent? If I post this a month from now, will I get the same results, or is there a tremendous amount of fluctuation and variability within that? And so what we found was, this is kind of what the task looked like, where they had to click on the supporting text. And what we found was, if you look on the far right-hand column across the different samples, so how does the student view their experience of college? And from across all the different samples, the answer was almost exactly the same in terms of the rating. And I thought that was a very encouraging sign that there was a high degree of consistency there. And then this was actually the #1 selected, what you see in green is across the 5 different samples, the most frequently selected text. So what was fascinating about this is the tremendous amount of reliability that we were able to produce through this crowdsourcing approach that I think has a lot of interesting implications for our practice. I did a similar study, again, that added to the degree of complexity. But one of the things that I did want to highlight is, in this study, we asked them to identify the best things things that were positive about the program, things that were kind of neutral about the program, and then things that were not so good about the program, and from the interview transcript. And so what was fascinating about this is we added the complexity piece of it, where we were asking them to really focus on different areas. And across 3 different samples, they were able to actually produce the same results. And so the blue represents kind of the neutral, the green represents the positive, and the red represents something that they perceived as a negative experience that a person had in the program. And from an implication standpoint, I think it has the potential to help us at least get another I don't think that this replaces deep qualitative analysis, but I think it provides us with a different perspective and another perspective on these types of interviews and focus groups that are produced. And I think it can potentially have a lot of use. This is another study where they were actually, we asked them to, how we develop program theories as part of our approach to evaluation. And one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to know if the crowd was capable of, if we taught them or told them, we are looking for these outcomes, for these specific outcomes that are derived from the interviews. Are they able to actually identify them and see them in the transcript? As a way to help us understand if the program theory models and the outcomes that were expected were showing up in these interviews. And so we had them in this particular case focus on these intermediate outcomes, and again, we had a series of transcripts that they read. And what was great about this study is that they were actually able to show us how different individuals, because we had 3 different transcripts, saw these outcomes slightly differently. And so, for example, perception of academic support, which is in the middle, what appeared there is that 2 of the individuals saw it as a very positive thing, that they experienced this, that they experienced this academic support piece as part of the program, while the 3rd individual said that they didn't experience it, and if not, they actually saw it as a very negative thing. And so we were able to kind of figure out if, as we build a number of transcripts, we're able to actually really coalesce and do some interesting analyses on how the program theory was implemented and the frequency and what that actually looked like, because they not only were able to show us, what these perceptions were of, for example, of academic support, but they were able to show us if they were positive or negative and provide us with supporting text. So they were conducting the analysis of this text on from different perspectives. And this is again the outline of the study. And I show you this for reference purposes. Now, this study I think is really applicable for evaluation practice, mainly because for those that collect, for example, open-ended responses on surveys, sometimes we don't necessarily have the time or energy to actually go through all of those open-ended responses and categorize them and analyze them. We actually did a test to see whether or not the crowd is able to do that on our behalf. If we provided them with a framework or thematic structure by which they would actually code short open-ended responses, and we did and we actually had trained coders that, what I would call in the traditional way of doing the analysis, and then the MTurkers who went through a training process. And the agreement between the trained coders was, for some reason it's not showing up, but that's okay. But that's just on one of the outcomes. It was about 87% agreement, and it varied from basically, the lowest was 60%, which wasn't very good, and it was all due to the way we set up the task or how we define that particular outcome. But the agreement on average was, at least on many of the items, was 80%, 85%, 90%, and some of the outcomes were actually 100%. So this is the agreement between what the crowd selected as the code for an open-ended response and what a trained coder did. And so the potential for this is that it actually would allow us to really analyze these open-ended responses if we have a framework to utilize relatively effectively, and I would say with a high degree of reliability. And then finally, one of the last studies that I wanted to share with you to show you kind of the direction in which we're going. This is related to the use of crowdsourcing to actually generate criteria and standards of performance for programs. This is the framing of this is a lot of programs are aimed to serve the public in some way, shape, or form. And it's often, very rarely, that the public's perspective on what they consider to be important is incorporated or represented in that. And this was a dissertation done by one of my former students that actually attempted to see if the crowd is capable of generating criteria for evaluating. In this case, it was a preschool program, and what we were able to do is we were able to really showcase how. Whether or not they're able to do it, and again, the details of the study are represented, but one of the and the specific phases. But one of the things I do want to point out is in this particular this is going to be my last slide. One of the things I did want to point out is they were able to highlight criteria that was both important and consistent, which means that across multiple samples, it was the same criteria that appeared, and then we asked them at a later sample, what do you think is the most important? And basically the important and consistent columns really were kind of what I would describe as the core criteria that we were able to use. And then we shared this criteria with expert evaluators who work in this particular domain. And we presented them with two lists, one that was generated by experts and then one that was generated by the crowd. And we asked them which one would be better or which one would you use. And in the responses, all the experts basically said that both criteria were equally valid and they would incorporate actually elements from both. And so you would have this public perspective on, or public opinion on criteria that was really that was seen as valid by professional evaluators who do practice in that specific domain. So I think there's a potential for further development in that area. And with that, I want to leave time for some questions. So go ahead. Sophia, yeah, there we go.
Thank you very much, Tarek. We do have some questions. I'm going to read some of them out loud and then paste them onto your private chat. The thing is, we only have 3 minutes for questions, so I'm going to try to be brief. First of all, we have a question, how easy is it to apply crowdsourcing in qualitative studies? Then we have some questions related to sampling in this kind of studies. One is, how can you customize the population you want? How can you better select the target group? Then when talking about crowdsourcing, what sample size you would consider? Is it different from any other evaluation studies? And then how to make sure to get the responses from the right sample? Is there in support in data analysis? Then we have a question about the quality of human intelligence tasks. How do you ensure the quality of completed human intelligence tasks by people around the world? So I'm going to give you the floor, and then I'm going to paste these questions onto your private chat box. I'm sorry to rush you, but we're a bit tight on time.
Sorry for taking the time, but I want to address a couple of things about sample selection. You are able to actually select criteria. So if you want individuals in particular regions, the website allows you to do it. The other option is to actually build that into your survey. And for those that don't, for example, qualify in terms of who you're looking for, then they don't get to take the survey, versus those that do get to continue. The quality of the actual data itself, there have been a lot of what I would call replication studies in both economics, psychology, sociology, where there's been established theories and results that are connected to that have been basically replicated over and over again. And what they did is they, as a test of quality, they put those same study designs on a crowdsourcing platform and found that the crowd actually produces the same results. And so there is that quality piece. And ultimately, the incentive to lie or cheat isn't very high in a crowdsourcing environment. Generally speaking, it does happen, but it's not very present. Mainly because there's a feedback mechanism that's associated with it. There's an approval. Every individual on there has an approval percentage, meaning that they successfully completed a task, and if they didn't successfully complete a task, then that approval goes down. And so there are checks and balances to it that I think kind of help to maintain the quality of the responses there. And I think that's all the time that I've got.